Thanksgiving was always the biggest day of the year for my family, filled with more noise and relatives than I could handle. This year, however, was different. We decided to do something special and unique, a big family gathering at the old farmhouse where my great-grandparents had lived, and where none of us had been for decades. My Uncle Ed suggested it. It's been empty for years, but it's still standing. We could spend the weekend there, just like they did in the old days. The idea had been met with excitement and a touch of curiosity. Most of us had never seen the place, and those who had only remembered it dimly. I was the first to arrive. As I pulled up, the farmhouse loomed ahead, nestled against the edge of a sprawling, leafless forest. The house was old but somehow still imposing. Its paint was chipped and faded, and the windows seemed dim and clouded, though I could see hints of a warm glow from the fireplace inside. Uncle Ed had come by earlier to get it ready, and as I opened the heavy, creaking door, I was greeted by the familiar, warm scent of burning wood and the distant sound of something. Was it a whisper? Shaking it off his nerves, I went inside, dropping my bags near the staircase and glancing around the dusty room. The walls were lined with old photographs, stern-faced ancestors who seemed to watch me as I moved. I forced myself to breathe. I wasn't usually one to scare easily, but there was something about those eyes that made me uneasy. Soon, the others began to arrive. My mom and dad, my cousins, Aunt Linda and her boyfriend, and Uncle Ed with his two sons. By late afternoon, the house was bustling with familiar voices and laughter. It felt almost normal, until, of course, the power went out. We were in the middle of setting up the dining room table when it happened. One moment, the lights were bright. The next, we were plunged into darkness. Someone cursed, and there was the sound of glass breaking as my cousin Sarah dropped a wine glass. Uncle Ed scrambled for a flashlight, eventually illuminating his face from below in a ghastly light that made everyone groan. "I knew I should have checked the power," he muttered. "Probably just a blown fuse, but I don't think anyone's done maintenance here in years. Should have brought more candles." "I brought some," Aunt Linda chimed in. She was always over-prepared, so this wasn't surprising. She rummaged through her bag, pulling out an assortment of tall white candles and setting them around the table. Soon, the room was glowing again, this time with a flickering, orange light that softened the edges of everything but deepened the shadows in the corners. Just as we were about to sit down, I heard a soft, scratching sound from above. I froze, my eyes darting toward the ceiling. "Did anyone else hear that?" I asked. My dad laughed. "It's just an old house, honey. They all make noises, probably squirrels or something." But as we began eating, I kept hearing it. Faint, irregular scratches as if something or someone was moving above us, dragging fingers along the floorboards. I tried to ignore it, but with each passing minute, the sound grew louder, more deliberate. When it became too much, I finally whispered to Uncle Ed, "Are there animals in the attic?" He frowned, listening for a moment before shaking his head. "I was up there earlier, place is empty, probably just, I don't know, settling wood. These houses do that." Despite his assurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. I tried to enjoy the meal, but each bite seemed to lodge in my throat, dry and tasteless. Then, just as we finished the turkey, the scratching stopped. An eerie silence fell over the room, thick and unnatural. My family must have felt it too, because all conversation ceased. We sat there, each of us waiting for something to break the quiet. It was Aunt Linda's boyfriend, Tom, who finally spoke up, his voice low. "Has anyone else noticed the smell?" It was faint at first, but once he mentioned it, I couldn't ignore it. A sour, metallic odor that seemed to seep up from the floor. It grew stronger with each passing second until I could taste it, coppery and thick on my tongue. I pushed my plate away, stomach churning. "What the hell is that?" my mom asked, her face pale. Uncle Ed stood, grabbing his flashlight. "Probably just something in the basement, maybe a dead animal or a pipe leak. I'll go check it out." He motioned for me to come with him. Maybe sensing that I was on edge and wanting to reassure me, I followed him down the creaky stairs into the basement, where the smell was overwhelming. It hung in the air like a fog, so thick I could barely breathe. The basement was a dark, cramped space filled with old furniture and boxes covered in cobwebs. The flashlight flickered as we moved, casting shifting shadows that seemed to stretch and reach out toward us. Uncle Ed moved the light across the room, his face tense. That's when I saw it, something glinting in the corner, half buried in the dirt floor. "Ed, what is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He shone the light over it, and my heart lurched. It was an old rusted knife, caked in something dark that had long since dried. I took a step back, my hands shaking. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, clearly unnerved. We turned to head back upstairs, but then the scratching started again, louder this time, coming from right above us. And now there was a new sound, a slow shuffling movement, like footsteps dragging across the floor. We raced upstairs, only to find everyone else staring up at the ceiling, faces pale with fear. The sound was unmistakable now, heavy and deliberate, moving from room to room above us. "What is that?" my dad whispered, clutching my mom's hand. No one answered. We all just stood there, frozen, as the footsteps continued, coming closer to the staircase. Then, without warning, the lights flickered back on, illuminating the room in a harsh, almost blinding brightness. But the sound didn't stop. It continued down the stairs, and I could see a shadow moving just beyond the edge of the hallway, long and distorted, stretching toward us. "Everyone out," Uncle Ed whispered, barely able to keep his voice steady. We backed away toward the front door, inching away from the approaching footsteps. But just as we reached the door, it slammed shut on its own, sealing us inside. Panic surged through me as I yanked at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. I looked around frantically, my family's faces twisted with fear and confusion. And then we heard it, a low, guttural voice, whispering from the shadows. "You're not welcome here." Aunt Linda screamed, and Uncle Ed pounded on the door, trying to break it down. But the voice only grew louder, filling the room with an otherworldly, bone-chilling intensity. The air grew colder, and the lights flickered once again, casting everything in a strobe-like horror. In a final act of desperation, Uncle Ed grabbed a chair, smashing it against the window. The glass shattered, and without hesitation, we clambered through, cutting ourselves on the shards but too terrified to care. Once outside, we sprinted to our cars, our breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked back just once and saw a figure standing in the broken window, its face hidden in shadow, but eyes glinting in the dim light. The smell of decay wafted out of the house, stronger than ever, and I stumbled, almost losing my balance as I turned away. We didn't speak during the drive back to town, each of us lost in our thoughts, unable to process what had happened. When we finally stopped, Uncle Ed turned to us, his face pale and drawn. "That was why no one lived there," he whispered. "My grandparents always said it was haunted. I thought it was just stories." No one argued with him. We knew deep down that we'd seen something that could never be explained, something that didn't want us there. Thanksgiving would never be the same again.